My name is Heather Mitchell and I'm 28 years old now, but when I was 16, my entire life changed in an instant. A car accident left my sister Megan severely injured, and for 11 long years, my parents made me believe it was entirely my fault. I carried that guilt like a stone in my chest until 3 months ago when I finally found the real police report. What I discovered shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. If you've ever been blamed for something that wasn't your fault, this story might help you find your own closure. Before I dive into what happened, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to join me on this journey of truth and healing. Before the accident, we were what everyone considered the perfect American family. We lived in a beautiful 2-story colonial house in a suburban neighborhood in Massachusetts with perfectly manicured lawns and friendly neighbors who waved as they walked their dogs. My parents, Robert and Catherine Mitchell, were both successful professionals. Dad was a corporate attorney, and Mom was a pediatrician with her own practice. They provided us with everything we could ever need or want: piano lessons, summer camps, family vacations to Disney World in Europe, and the newest clothes and gadgets. Our family portrait hung above the fireplace, Mom and Dad standing behind Megan and me, all of us smiling widely in coordinated outfits against a soft blue background. Anyone looking at that portrait would have thought we had the perfect life, and in many ways, we did. Megan was 14 when the accident happened, 2 years younger than me, but she always seemed to shine brighter. She was a star soccer player, already being scouted by college coaches despite her young age. With her athletic build, sun-kissed blonde hair, and our mother's striking green eyes, she turned heads wherever she went. Megan was confident, outgoing, and naturally gifted at almost everything she tried. I loved my sister fiercely, but there was always that undercurrent of competition between us. Where Megan was athletic and outgoing, I was more introverted and academic. I got straight A's, was editor of the school newspaper, and spent hours reading books or writing stories in my journal. My parents attended all of Megan's soccer games, cheering loudly from the sidelines, but they rarely made it to my debate competitions or writing award ceremony. It wasn't that they didn't care, they were just more naturally drawn to Megan's activities, something I had learned to accept over the years. "Heather, did you see that goal your sister scored today? That's why Duke is already showing interest," my dad would say over dinner, beaming with pride. "That's great," I would respond, waiting for someone to ask about my day or the A I'd received on my English essay. The question rarely came. The day before the accident was a Saturday in April. Megan's team had just won the regional championship, and our house was buzzing with excitement. Dad had fired up the grill for a celebratory barbecue, and Mom had invited some of the neighbors and Megan's teammates over. I helped set up tables in the backyard, ranging plates and cups while listening to everyone praise my sister's winning goal. "You must be so proud of your sister," Mrs. Reynolds, our neighbor, said to me as I refilled the ice bucket. "I am," I replied with a genuine smile. Despite the comparisons, I truly was proud of Megan. It wasn't her fault that she was the favorite. That evening, as the party wound down, I sat on the porch swing with Megan, both of us licking ice cream cones as the spring air cooled around us. "Want to go to the mall tomorrow?" I asked. "I just got my allowance." Megan's face lit up. "Yes, I need new cleats, and Mom said we could look at dresses for the spring dance too." "I can drive us," I suggested cautiously. I had received my learner's permit just 3 weeks earlier and was only allowed to drive with my parents in the car. It was a long shot, but worth asking. "Mom and Dad will never let you," Megan laughed, not unkindly, "but maybe we can convince them to take us." Later that night, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen as I came downstairs for a glass of water. "Megan's really something special, isn't she?" Dad was saying. "Coach Wilson thinks she could go all the way to the Olympics if she keeps developing at this rate." "I know," Mom replied. "We need to make sure we're supporting her every step of the way. These next few years are crucial." I stood silently in the hallway, invisible as usual in the glow of my sister's accomplishments. I didn't begrudge Megan her success, I just wished my parents could be equally excited about my achievements too. As I climbed back upstairs to my bedroom, with its wall of academic certificates and shelves of books, I had no idea that by this time tomorrow our family dynamic would be irreversibly shattered, and that I would spend the next 11 years of my life drowning in guilt and blame for something that wasn't my fault. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. I woke up early, excitement bubbling in my chest at the thought of our mall trip. I had been saving my allowance for weeks to buy a new pair of Doc Martens I'd been eyeing. After a quick shower, I headed downstairs to find my parents in the kitchen, both dressed in business attire instead of their usual Sunday casual clothes. "Emergency at work," Dad explained, adjusting his tie with a frown. the Johnson merger is falling apart, and I need to go in for damage control. Mom was gathering her things as well, and I just got called in for a consultation at the hospital. One of my patients was admitted last night with concerning symptoms. My heart sank, but what about taking us to the mall? Megan needs new cleats and we were going to look at spring dance dresses. My parents exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that parents seem to master. Megan has soccer practice at 10 a.m., Mom said. She can't miss it. Coach Wilson is working with her specially on penalty kicks. What if, I started hesitantly, what if I drive Megan to practice? I have my permit, then I could pick her up afterward, and we could go to the mall for a quick shopping trip before you get home. Dad immediately shook his head. Absolutely not. You've only had your permit for 3 weeks and we haven't practiced enough together. But I'm a good driver. You said so yourself last time, I protested, and it's Sunday, the roads will be empty. I said no, Heather, Dad replied firmly. That's when Megan came bouncing into the kitchen, already dressed in her practice clothes, soccer ball tucked under her arm. When she heard about the change of plans, her face fell dramatically. But I really need those cleats for Tuesday's game. Coach said my old ones don't have enough traction on wet fields. Mom checked her watch with a sigh. We don't have any other options, unless... Another glance between my parents. I held my breath. Fine, Dad finally relented. Heather can drive Megan to practice and pick her up, but he emphasized, pointing a stern finger at me, you go straight there and straight back, no mall, no detours. We'll all go shopping when we get home tonight. You'll be careful, right? Mom asked, her expression serious. No speeding, no radio, full attention on the road. I promise, I said solemnly, trying to contain my excitement at this unexpected vote of confidence. I'll be super careful. Dad handed me the keys to Mom's Volvo, the safer car, with clear reluctance. Call us when you get there, and when you're heading back, keep your phone on. With final warnings and instructions, my parents left for their respective emergencies, and suddenly Megan and I were alone with the car keys and a small taste of freedom. The drive to the soccer field went perfectly. I drove exactly at the speed limit, stopped completely at every stop sign, and kept both hands firmly on the wheel at the 10 and 2 positions, just as my driving instructor had taught me. Megan chatted excitedly about soccer strategies beside me, occasionally glancing at me with newfound respect. You're actually pretty good at this, she admitted as I executed a perfect parallel parking job at the soccer field. Thanks, I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. Maybe now Mom and Dad will let me drive more often. I spent the next 2 hours reading on the bleachers while Megan practiced with her coach and a few teammates. The spring sun felt warm on my face, and for once, I felt like I was doing something right in my parents' eyes. I was being responsible, helping out when they needed me to step up. Practice ended at noon. Megan jogged over to me, her face flushed with exertion and satisfaction. Coach says my penalty kicks are getting much better, she announced as we walked back to the car. He thinks I'll be ready to be the designated kicker by the state finals. That's awesome, I said, genuinely happy for her. This was one of those rare moments when it was just the two of us, no parents around to create the usual dynamic of favoritism. In these moments, we were just sisters who actually liked each other. As I started the car to head home, I noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Weather in New England could change in an instant, especially in spring. Looks like rain, Megan commented, fastening her seatbelt. Good thing we practiced today instead of Tuesday. We were about halfway home when the storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Rain came down in sheets, pounding against the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. I slowed the car to well below the speed limit, leaning forward to peer through the curtain of water, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Maybe we should pull over and wait it out, Megan suggested, her earlier casualness replaced by evident concern. We're only about 10 minutes from home, I replied, though I was starting to question my decision to continue. I think we'll be okay if I just go really slow. We approached the intersection of Maple and Westfield, a major crossing with traffic lights. Our light was green, and I proceeded cautiously, still driving well under the speed limit. That's when it happened. I saw a flash of movement to my left, a blue pickup truck coming toward the intersection at high speed. It wasn't slowing down for the red light. In the split second I had to react, I hit the horn and tried to swerve right. Too late. The impact was deafening, metal crunching against metal, glass shattering, tires screeching on wet pavement. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of rain and broken glass. I remember hearing Megan scream, feeling the airbag explode against my face with stunning force. And then nothing. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of hospital machines. My head throbbed and my left arm was encased in a cast. Disoriented, I tried to piece together what had happened, but my memories were fragmented. Rain, a blue truck, the horrible sound of impact. "She's awake," someone said, and suddenly a nurse was leaning over me, checking my pupils with a small flashlight. "Megan," I croaked, my throat dry and painful. "My sister, where's Megan?" The nurse's expression shifted subtly. "Your sister is being treated, dear. Try not to worry about that right now. Your parents are here, they've been waiting for you to wake up." A moment later, my parents appeared in the doorway. Their faces were drawn, eyes red-rimmed from crying. Mom had a tissue clutched in her hand, and Dad looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. "How could you?" Mom whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to your sister?" Those were the first words my mother spoke to me after I regained consciousness. Not "thank God you're alive" or "we were so worried," just accusation, immediate and devastating. "What?" I asked, confusion clouding my already fuzzy thoughts. "What happened to Megan?" Dad stepped forward, his face hard. "She has spinal injuries, Heather. They don't know if she'll walk again." The weight of those words crashed over me like another car impact. Megan, the soccer star with Olympic dreams, might never walk again, and somehow in my parents' eyes it was all my fault. I was discharged from the hospital 3 days after the accident with a concussion, a broken arm and various cuts and bruises that would eventually heal. My physical injuries were nothing compared to the emotional wound that had been torn open by my parents' reaction. Megan remained in the hospital for weeks. She had suffered a severe spinal cord injury at the derailed vertebra, which meant she had lost function in her legs. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about partial recovery with extensive physical therapy, but they warned that a full return to her previous athletic abilities was unlikely. My parents barely spoke to me during those first few days home. They took shifts at the hospital with Megan, leaving me alone in our empty house with my growing guilt and confusion. My memories of the accident were still fragmented. I remembered the rain, the green light, and then the blue truck appearing suddenly. But had I done something wrong? Had I been driving too fast for the conditions? Should I have been able to avoid the collision? When my parents were home, their cold silence was punctuated only by necessary communication and the occasional cutting remark. "If you had been paying proper attention, you would have seen that truck coming," Dad said one evening as he microwaved a quick dinner before heading back to the hospital. "But I had a green light," I protested weakly. "The truck ran the red." "You should have been more careful," he replied, not even looking at me. "You knew it was raining. You should have been watching for other vehicles regardless of the light." A police officer had come to take my statement at the hospital. I remembered him telling my parents that preliminary evidence suggested the other driver was at fault. He had run a red light and was speeding, but my parents seemed to have dismissed this information entirely. "It doesn't matter what the light was," Mom said when I brought it up. "You shouldn't have been driving in that kind of weather in the first place. We trusted you, and look what happened." The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. "You ruined your sister's life." A week after the accident, I was allowed to visit Megan in the hospital for the first time. My parents had been reluctant to let me see her, as if my presence might somehow make her condition worse. When I walked into her room, the sight of my athletic, vibrant sister lying pale and motionless in the hospital bed nearly brought me to my knees. "Hi," I said softly, hovering uncertainly at the foot of her bed. Megan looked up at me, her eyes dull with pain medication. "Hey," she replied flatly. I stepped closer, placing the small stuffed bear I'd brought on her bedside table. "I'm so sorry, Megan. I'm so sorry." She turned her face away. "Mom and Dad say I probably won't play soccer again." Those words, so simple, so devastating, broke something inside me. I started to cry, silent tears streaming down my face. "I didn't see the truck until it was too late," I whispered. "I swear I was being careful." Megan didn't respond. My parents, who had stepped out briefly to give us privacy, returned and immediately noticed my tears. "I think that's enough for today," Mom said firmly, placing a protective hand on Megan's shoulder. "Megan needs her rest." As Dad led me out of the room, he muttered, "You've done enough damage. The least you can do is keep it together when you see her." By the time Megan finally came home 2 months later, our house had been transformed. Dad had installed wheelchair ramps, widened doorways, and converted the formal dining room into a bedroom for Megan so she wouldn't have to navigate the stairs. The soccer trophies still lined the shelves in her old room upstairs, a shrine to the life she's lost. I tried to help with Megan's care, but my parents consistently pushed me away. "Haven't you done enough?" became their refrain whenever I offered assistance. Mom quit her practice to become Megan's full-time caregiver, overseeing her physical therapy and doctor appointments. Dad worked longer hours to compensate for the lost income and the mounting medical bills. I became increasingly invisible in my own home, a ghost drifting from room to room, carrying the weight of blame that grew heavier with each passing day. Megan's initial coldness toward me eventually thawed slightly, especially when our parents weren't around. Sometimes when we were alone, we'd watch TV together or I'd help her with homework she's missed. In those rare moments, I caught glimpses of our old relationship. "It wasn't your fault," she said once, so quietly I almost missed it. The truck ran the light. Hope flared in my chest. "That's what I've been trying to tell Mom and Dad." But the next day, when Dad bitterly commented on how much the physical therapy was costing, Megan's momentary forgiveness evaporated. "If Heather hadn't been driving, none of this would have happened," she said, echoing our parents' sentiment. That's how it went, occasional moments of connection followed by renewed blame. Eventually, Megan seemed to fully absorb our parents' narrative I was responsible for destroying her future. The sister bond we once had stretched thinner and thinner until it was barely visible, a ghost of what might have been. 2 years after the accident, I stood in my bedroom surrounded by half-packed boxes, college acceptance letters spread across my bed. I had been accepted to several schools, including my dream choice, Northwestern University, with its prestigious journalism program. But the acceptance had come with only a partial scholarship, not enough to cover the full cost. "We need to talk about college," Dad said from my doorway, his face grave. I already knew what was coming. We'd had versions of this conversation for months. "Northwestern is too expensive," he continued. "Between Megan's medical bills and the modifications to the house, we just don't have the money for an out-of-state private university." "I can take out loans," I suggested, though we both knew that would mean substantial debt. "State university is a perfectly good option, and you can live at home to save on housing costs," he replied, as if the decision had already been made. "Besides, Megan needs support. Your mother can't do everything alone." I wanted to argue, to point out that my academic achievements had earned me this opportunity, that this was my future we were discussing, but the ever-present guilt stopped me. How could I insist on an expensive education when Megan would never play college soccer? When medical bills were straining the family finances? When it was all supposedly my fault? So I attended the state university 30 minutes from home, commuting daily, watching my dreams of journalism school fade away like morning mist. I threw myself into my studies, staying on campus as late as possible each day to avoid going home to the cold atmosphere that awaited me. Visits home became increasingly rare and uncomfortable as the years passed. Holiday dinners were exercises in tension management, with conversations carefully navigated around dangerous topics, but inevitably something would trigger a reference to life before and after the accident. "Remember when Megan scored the winning goal at regionals?" Dad would reminisce, staring into his glass of wine. "She had such a future ahead of her," Mom would add with a pointed glance in my direction. By this point, Megan had adjusted somewhat to life in a wheelchair. She'd finished high school and was taking community college classes in graphic design, a creative outlet she could pursue without the physical demands of sports. But every achievement was tinged with the shadow of what might have been, and I was never allowed to forget my role in altering her trajectory. My own mental health deteriorated under the constant weight of blame. Anxiety and depression became my constant companions. In my junior year of college, a concerned professor suggested I visit the campus counseling center after I had a panic attack during a presentation. The therapist, Dr. Lillian Carter, became my lifeline. In her small office with its comfortable chairs and soft lighting, I finally found a space where I could speak openly about the accident and its aftermath. "Have you ever considered that the accident might not have been your fault?" Dr. Carter asked during one session. I laughed bitterly. "My family has made it perfectly clear that it was. But from what you've described, a truck running a red light in a rainstorm, it sounds like you were the victim of a traffic violation, not the cause of the accident." I shook my head. "I should have been more careful. I should have seen it coming." "That's a common reaction called survivor's guilt," she explained gently. "When something traumatic happens, especially when someone else is hurt worse than you are, it's natural to look for ways to blame yourself, but that doesn't mean you're actually at fault." Her words planted a tiny seed of doubt about the narrative I'd accepted for so long, but it was too fragile to take root against the overwhelming force of my family's blame. After graduation, I took a job at a local marketing firm instead of pursuing journalism. It wasn't my dream career, but it paid well enough and kept me close to home, a concession to the lingering obligation I felt toward my family despite their treatment of me. My 27th birthday marked a breaking point. I had invited my parents and Megan for dinner at my small apartment, hoping that the neutral territory might help ease the perpetual tension. I'd spent all day cooking Megan's favorite lasagna, buying a special cake, and decorating the place with subtle birthday touches. They arrived late, with no explanation or apology. Dad immediately commented on the lack of elevator access to my second-floor apartment, though Megan had assured me beforehand that she could manage the building's wide staircase with her upper body strength and minimal assistance. The dinner started awkwardly but civilly enough. I asked about their lives, and they provided brief updates. Then Mom mentioned that they were considering a vacation to Florida. It would be good for Megan to get some sun and swim therapy, she said. The doctor thinks swimming might help strengthen her core muscles. That sounds great, I replied sincerely. When are you thinking of going? We're not sure we can afford it right now, Dad sighed. Between the medical bills and the modifications we had to make to the bathroom last year. The implication hung in the air. If not for the accident, if not for me, they wouldn't have these financial burdens. Something snapped inside me. 11 years of blame, of carrying a guilt that had shaped my entire adult life, suddenly felt unbearable. I was 16, I said quietly, my voice trembling. I had a green light. The truck ran a red light in a rainstorm. How long are you going to punish me for something that wasn't my fault? Silence fell over the table like a heavy blanket. Then Dad's face hardened. Not your fault, he repeated incredulously. Whose fault was it then? You were the driver. You were responsible for your sister's safety. I was a kid with a learner's permit who got hit by a driver who ran a red light. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you have any idea what it's been like living with this blame for 11 years, having my entire life shaped by guilt for an accident I couldn't have prevented? Mom's lips thinned to a white line. I think we should go. They left without finishing dinner, without birthday wishes, without the cake I'd so carefully selected. As the door closed behind them, I sank to the floor and cried, not just for the ruined birthday, but for the 11 years of my life that had been sacrificed to undeserved blame. A week after the disastrous birthday dinner, I met my friend Taylor for coffee. We'd been friends since college, and she was one of the few people who knew the full story of my family situation. She worked as a paralegal at a law firm specializing in personal injury cases and had always been skeptical of my parents' version of events. Have you ever actually seen the police report from the accident? She asked as we settled into a corner table at our favorite cafe. I stirred my latte absently. No, I was a minor, so everything went through my parents. Taylor set down her cup with decisive force. That's what I thought. Heather, I think you should request a copy of that report. Why? What good would it do now? It's been 11 years. Because I think your parents have been gaslighting you, she said bluntly. From everything you've told me, that accident wasn't your fault, but they've made you believe it was for over a decade. They're still my family, I protested weakly, though her words resonated with something that had been growing inside me since my birthday meltdown. Family doesn't treat each other the way they've treated you, Taylor replied, her expression softening. Look, just get the report. Knowledge is power. Maybe it will help you find some closure. I left the cafe with the contact information for the police records department scribbled on a napkin, but it took me another week to work up the courage to make the call. The process was surprisingly straightforward. Fill out a request form, pay a small fee, prove my identity as one of the involved parties, and wait. The waiting was the hardest part. 2 weeks of second-guessing, of wondering whether I was betraying my family by seeking this information, of fearing what I might discover. What if the report confirmed that I had been at fault in some way? What if my parents had been right all along? When the manila envelope finally arrived in my mailbox, I left it sitting unopened on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Every time I walked past, I felt its presence like a live thing, pulsing with potential revelations that might either free me or confirm the burden I'd carried for so long. On the 4th night, after a glass of wine for courage, I finally opened it. The report was several pages long, filled with technical language and diagrams. I spread the papers across my coffee table and began to read, my heart pounding. The facts laid out in black and white were clear and unambiguous. The driver of the blue Ford -150 pickup truck, one James Michael Donovan, had a blood alcohol level of 0.14, well above the legal limit. Witness statements, 4 of them, all confirmed that I had proceeded through the intersection on a green light while the truck had run the red at approximately 48 mph in a 35 mph zone. The officer's conclusion stated explicitly no fault on part of minor driver Mitchell Heather, accident caused by driver of vehicle B Donovan James, who failed to stop at traffic signal while intoxicated. Further pages detailed Donovan's prior record, 2 previous DUIs, a suspended license that had recently been reinstated, and pending criminal charges for this incident. I read the report 3 times, my hands shaking more violently with each pass. For 11 years I had lived under the crushing weight of blame for an accident that, according to official police investigation, I could not have prevented. The truck driver had been drunk, speeding, and had run a red light. There was nothing I could have done. But then I noticed something else in the file, a receipt of documents. My parents had received a copy of this very report 3 weeks after the accident. They had known all along that I wasn't at fault, yet they had allowed me forced me to believe that I was responsible for ruining Megan's life. I don't remember much about the next hour. I know I screamed until my throat was raw. I know I threw my wine glass against the wall, watching it shatter much like our family had. I know I cried until there were no tears left, just dry, heaving sobs that felt like they were tearing me apart from the inside. When the storm of emotion finally subsided, I sat amidst the wreckage of my apartment, papers strewn across the floor, glass shards glittering in the dim light, wine staining the wall like blood, and felt something new emerging from the chaos: anger, pure, righteous anger at the injustice that had shaped my entire adult life. I had lost my chance at my dream school. I had abandoned my aspirations in journalism. I had lived small, diminished by guilt, walking on eggshells around my family, accepting their coldness and blame as my due punishment, all for an accident that was never my fault. And my parents had known. That was the betrayal I couldn't comprehend. The people who were supposed to protect me, to love me unconditionally, had deliberately fostered a false narrative that had crippled me emotionally as surely as the accident had affected Megan physically. Why? What possible reason could they have had to blame their own daughter for something that wasn't her fault? The questions burned in my mind as I carefully gathered the police report pages, placing them back in order, treating them now like the precious evidence they were. One thing was certain: I couldn't let this stand. For my own healing, for my future, I needed to confront my parents with the truth. But first, I needed to make copies. Something told me I shouldn't let the original report out of my possession. The next morning, I took the report to a copy shop and made several duplicates. As the machine hummed and flashed, producing exact replicas of the pages that had shattered my understanding of the past 11 years, I felt a strange calm settling over me. For the first time since the accident, I knew without doubt that I was not to blame. That knowledge was power, just as Taylor had said. I was done living in the shadow of undeserved guilt. It was time for the truth to come to light, whatever the consequences might be for my already fractured family. I spent the next week preparing for the confrontation, rehearsing what I would say, imagining their possible reactions, steeling myself for denial or deflection. I decided that Sunday dinner would be the best time. They still held their weekly family meals, though I was rarely invited anymore. But I knew Megan would be there, and I wanted her to hear the truth as well. I arrived unannounced at my parents' house at 6 p.m., the familiar time when Sunday dinner would be in progress. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat as I rang the doorbell, the manila envelope clutched tightly in my hand. Mom answered, her surprise quickly shifting to wariness. "Heather, we weren't expecting you." "I know," I said simply. "May I come in? I need to talk to all of you." She hesitated, then stepped back reluctantly. "We're just finishing dinner." I followed her to the dining room, where Dad and Megan looked up in surprise. The remains of roast chicken and vegetables were scattered across their plates. Some things never changed. Sunday roast had been a tradition since we were kids. "Heather," Dad acknowledged stiffly, "what brings you here?" "I need to talk to you," I repeated, remaining standing even as Mom slipped back into her chair. "All of you." Megan watched me curiously from her wheelchair at the modified table space. She looked well. Her graphic design career was taking off, from what I'd heard through mutual acquaintances, and the strain that had marked her face in the early years after the accident had largely faded. "Can it wait until after dinner?" Dad asked, gesturing to their plates. "No," I said firmly. "It's waited 11 years already. That's long enough." Something in my tone must have conveyed my resolve, because they all stopped eating and gave me their full attention. I took a deep breath and placed the envelope on the table. "I have the police report from the accident," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "The real one." Dad's face tightened instantly. Mom paled. Megan just looked confused. "What do you mean, the real one?" she asked, glancing between me and our parents. Instead of answering, I pulled out the copies I'd made and placed one in front of each of them. "Read it," I said, "especially the officer's conclusion on page 3 and the receipt of documents on the last page." There was a moment of tense silence as they looked down at the papers. Dad was the first to push his copy away. "This doesn't change anything," he said, his voice hard but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps. Doesn't change anything, I repeated incredulously. It changes everything. I wasn't at fault. The truck driver was drunk and ran a red light. The police investigation concluded there was nothing I could have done to prevent the accident. I turned to Megan, whose face had gone slack with shock as she read. And they knew. They received this report 3 weeks after the accident, but they let me believe it was my fault. They let you believe it was my fault. Robert, Mom whispered, her hand trembling as she set down the report. She knows. Knows what? Megan asked, looking up with confusion and growing anger. What is she talking about? The dam inside me broke. 11 years of suppressed pain and resentment came pouring out in a torrent of words. They blamed me for ruining your life, Megan. For 11 years they've made me carry the guilt for something that wasn't my fault. They made me give up Northwestern because we needed the money for your medical bills. They made me stay close to home, keep my life small. Accept their cold treatment as deserved punishment. And all along they knew what this report says, that I was just a kid with a green light who got hit by a drunk driver. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. The release was cathartic, washing away years of accumulated pain. Is this true? Megan asked our parents, her voice dangerously quiet. Did you know the accident wasn't Heather's fault? Dad's face had gone red. It's more complicated than that. It's not complicated at all, I shouted. Either you knew and lied to both of us for 11 years, or you didn't read the report that was sent to you. Which is it? Mom burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. Dad worked silently for a moment before he exploded. You want the truth? Fine. Yes, we knew the legal fault was with the other driver. But if you hadn't been driving in that storm, if you had waited for us to come home like we told you to in the first place, none of this would have happened. Megan would still be able to walk. She would have had her soccer career. Our lives wouldn't have been destroyed. Our marriage was already falling apart before the accident, Mom admitted suddenly, looking up with tear-stained cheeks. We were talking about divorce. Then when Megan got hurt, it was easier to focus on that, to have something outside ourselves to blame. So you blamed your other daughter? I asked, my voice breaking. You sacrificed my future, my mental health, my relationship with my sister because it was easier than dealing with your own problems? We lost everything because of that accident, Dad continued, as if he hadn't heard me. Our savings, our retirement plans, the life we'd built. And you made sure I lost everything too, I said bitterly. My dreams, my self-worth, my place in this family. Megan had been silent, staring at the report in front of her. Now she looked up, her face twisted with a complex mix of emotions. You lied to me, she said to our parents, her voice soft but cutting. All these years you let me believe Heather was responsible. You encouraged me to blame her. We were trying to protect you, Mom pleaded. By making me hate my sister? Megan shot back, her voice rising. By destroying our relationship, how was that protecting me? The confrontation continued for nearly an hour, with years of buried truths and festering resentments finally exposed to the harsh light of day. Dad alternated between defensive anger and reluctant admissions. Mom cycled through tears, apologies, and attempts to justify their actions. Megan sat in stunned silence much of the time, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her own sense of betrayal. Through it all I stood my ground, refusing to accept excuses or minimizations. When I had finally said everything I needed to say, I gathered the original report and headed for the door. Heather, wait, Dad called after me. We need to talk about this. I've been waiting 11 years to talk about this, I replied without turning around. I'm done waiting. If you want to talk, you can call me when you're ready to take responsibility for what you did. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. Despite the emotional exhaustion, the truth was finally out, and whatever happened next, I would face it unburdened by the weight of undeserved guilt. My phone began ringing almost immediately after I got home. I ignored the calls from my parents, needing space to process what had happened, but when Megan's name flashed on the screen a few days later, I answered. Can we meet? She asked simply, just you and me. There's a lot we need to talk about. 1 week after the confrontation, I sat in a quiet corner of Riverside Cafe, nervously watching the door. Megan had suggested this meeting place neutral territory where we could talk privately. I'd arrived early, ordering a chai latte that now sat cooling in front of me as I rehearsed what I wanted to say. When Megan wheeled through the door, I raised my hand in an awkward half-wave. She navigated between the tables with practiced ease, stopping across from me. I ordered you a mocha, I said, pushing the cup toward her. You still like those, right? Thanks, she replied, taking a sip. Some things don't change. An uncomfortable silence settled between us. 11 years of manufactured blame had created a chasm that wouldn't be easily bridged. I'm sorry, we both blurted simultaneously, then gave startled laughs. You first, Megan said, gesturing for me to continue. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry I didn't push harder to find out the truth sooner. I'm sorry I let them convince me it was my fault, and that I let that belief damage our relationship. You're my sister, and I should have fought harder to maintain our bond. Megan nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. I'm sorry I believed them so easily. I was 14 in pain, grieving the loss of everything I'd planned for my future. But that's no excuse. I should have remembered that you loved me, that you would never have intentionally hurt me. You were a kid, I said gently. We both were. The adults in this situation should have done better. Megan's eyes welled with tears. Do you know what the worst part is? All these years, while I was blaming you, I was also secretly resenting you for getting to have a normal life while mine fell apart. But now I find out your life wasn't normal at all. They stole that from you too. I reached across the table to take her hand. We've both lost so much time. Did you really want to go to Northwestern, she asked, for journalism? I nodded. It was my dream school, but when Dad said they needed the money for your medical bills, I had no idea, Megan whispered. They never told me about any of that. I just assumed you wanted to stay close to home. We spent the next 2 hours talking, really talking for the first time in over a decade. Megan told me about her graphic design work, how she'd found a new passion after losing soccer. I shared stories about my marketing job, my small circle of friends, the life I'd built despite the constraints placed on me. What are we going to do about Mom and Dad? Megan finally asked, setting down her second mocha. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to cut them off completely, but another part recognizes that they're still our parents, however flawed. They've been calling me constantly since you left that night, Megan said. Dad keeps saying they had good intentions, that they were just trying to hold the family together after the accident. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. By sacrificing one daughter to protect the other, that's not holding a family together. No, Megan agreed quietly, it's not. We decided to meet with our parents together, presenting a united front for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. The meeting was set for the following Sunday, not at their house but at a family counseling center Megan had researched. When we arrived, our parents were already there, looking nervous and out of place in the neutral, professionally decorated room. A family therapist named Dr. Harrison facilitated the conversation, helping us establish ground rules and keeping the discussion from veering into blame and defensiveness. I think what your daughters need right now, Dr. Harrison said gently to our parents, is acknowledgement of the harm done, without justification or excuses. Dad struggled visibly with this concept, his instinct to defend their choices battling with the undeniable evidence of the pain those choices had caused. We thought we were protecting the family, he insisted. By destroying it, I asked, my voice breaking. By turning Megan against me? By making me believe I'd ruined her life? We were drowning, Mom said, tears streaming down her face. The medical bills, the fear for Megan's future, our marriage problems. We didn't know how to handle it all. So you found a scapegoat, Megan said flatly. You used Heather as an emotional dumping ground for all your fear and anger and grief. Slowly, painfully, over the course of several hours, our parents began to recognize the magnitude of what they had done. The defensiveness gradually gave way to genuine remorse as they faced the full consequences of their actions. I don't expect forgiveness right away, Dad said finally, his voice hoarse, but I want you both to know that I see now how wrong we were, and I'm truly deeply sorry. We want to make amends, Mom added, whatever that looks like, whatever you need from us. It wasn't an immediate healing, far from it. Dr. Harrison suggested ongoing family therapy, as well as individual counseling for all of us. My parents agreed to this, a step that surprised me given their traditional reluctance to discuss family problems with outsiders. The road to rebuilding trust was long and often difficult. There were setbacks and heated arguments, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But there were also breakthroughs, like when Dad helped me research graduate journalism programs, or when Mom apologized specifically for the Northwestern situation and offered to help financially if I wanted to pursue my dream belatedly. 6 months after finding the police report, we had our first relatively normal family dinner. The conversation still had awkward pauses and careful navigation around sensitive topics, but there was also genuine laughter and moments of connection that had been absent for over a decade. After dinner, as Megan and I helped clear the table, a task I'd been implicitly excluded from in the years of blame, she nudged her wheelchair against my hip. We're going to be okay, aren't we? She asked softly. I think we are, I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. My own healing journey continued beyond the family reconciliation. I started a support group for people carrying undeserved guilt, survivors of accidents, people blamed for circumstances beyond their control, individuals working to reclaim their sense of self after years of gaslighting. Sharing my story helped others find the courage to examine their own burdens of blame and consider whether they, too, might be carrying guilt that wasn't rightfully theirs. Through the support group, I met Michael, a man who had spent years blaming himself for his brother's injury in a childhood accident. His understanding of my experience created an immediate connection between us, which slowly blossomed into a relationship built on mutual respect and shared healing. I also finally applied to graduate school for journalism, not at Northwestern, but at a well-respected program that offered evening classes so I could continue working. It wasn't the same dream I'd had at 18, but it was a reclamation of the path I'd been forced to abandon, now pursued on my own terms. The truth, I've learned, has a way of surfacing eventually. 11 years is a long time to live under the shadow of false blame, but the light of truth, however delayed, still has the power to heal and transform. My relationship with my parents will never be what it might have been without the years of deception, but it's evolving into something new, something more authentic, built on hard-won honesty rather than comfortable illusions. And my relationship with Megan has been reborn, stronger in some ways for having been broken. We've become fiercely protective of each other, determined not to lose another decade of sisterhood to misunderstanding or manipulation. I still have days when the old guilt tries to reassert itself, when I catch myself shrinking to accommodate others' comfort or doubting my right to pursue my own happiness. Recovery isn't linear, it's a winding path with unexpected setbacks and surprising moments of clarity. But I'm learning that forgiveness of others and especially of myself isn't a single decision but a daily practice. I'm learning that while we can't change the past, we can change how we carry it with us into the future, and I'm learning that sometimes finding the truth is just the beginning of the journey toward healing. If my story resonates with you in any way, if you're carrying a burden of blame that might not be yours to bear, I encourage you to seek your own truth. It may not be found in a police report or official document, but in the quiet voice inside that whispers, "This isn't your fault. You deserve to live unburdened by unearned guilt." Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you or made you think about your own experiences with blame or family dynamics, please leave a comment below. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed how you viewed your past? Have you found ways to heal from family trauma? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our community of healing and growth. Remember, the weight you're carrying might not be yours, and setting it down could be the first step toward the life you deserve.